Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining Temple Hayes podcast on Fire for Life. And I feel so blessed because I have the opportunity to meet the most amazing human beings that walk this planet, I'm telling you. And someone that I've grown to know and love is Joe McQuillan. He is a fascinating human being, lived the richest life, he and his wife with three boys. And as he says, we have three boys and we have one on the other side named Chris.
Right.
And so I met you. I was thinking about that earlier today. Was it like 6 years ago that Chris
Okay,
died?
it was 7.5 years ago that Chris transitioned.
Okay.
And then you and I hooked up when you were uh, literally moving to Santa Barbara. You were leaving
Yeah.
from Florida, and I was in Florida and went and spoke at the church that you had been at.
Yes.
Yeah,
For a long time. Yes.
right.
Well, it's just I can only imagine the number of people that you have helped by your willingness and your bravery, to tell your story and to talk about it with such conviction and knowing. So I'm just going to read that your first book where you tell about Christopher on the other side. It tells the story of the journey of discovery over the first 2 years and the search for Christopher on the other side was the name of that book. And the second book is We're Not Done Yet, Pop, My Lessons from the Other Side. I think it's important if we state for our listening group, because we have people that
Sure.
are new to this particular podcast. And so let's give them a bit of a recap. So why don't you take it from here, my friend?
Okay, thanks. And thanks for having me on and helping me share Christopher's story. So in final Christmas break of 2015, um, my boy was home on 21-year-old from college, and and they were celebrating the last weekend after New Year's, January 3rd, 2016, at a friend's lake house in a lake up in Wisconsin called Lake Beulah at one of their friends' lake house. There was a dozen kids, and they had all gone to school together, a very big high school. And so they had known each other for a good part of their lives, and so they were just going somewhere that was kind of a safe setting to kick up their heels, maybe drink a little bit too much, shoot some pool, and crash, and all of them would come back the next morning. And so I was expecting Chris I saw him right before he left with a friend, Patrick, and I was expecting him home on Sunday morning to watch a football game with me. I grew up in Buffalo. We're Buffalo Bills fans, and when Chris was home from school or we were together, we always watched games together along with his little brother Will. And the third child is actually my daughter Caroline, who's getting married in August, and
Mm.
she was the middle child. And so Christopher, I get a text from one of his friends that says, "Mr. McHugh, um, you know, Chris is missing with a couple of friends." So I grabbed the Labrador, jumped in the Jeep, started driving up, and fully expected him to show up at a keg party or at a boathouse with some co-ed, or hanging out with some buddies. And halfway up, I got a phone call that said, um, it's no longer search but a recovery, that all four boys had drowned. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, the boys left the house as 21-year-olds will, you know, the snoot full of alcohol, the bravado of being 21,
Hmm.
untied Timberland boots, loose clothing, jumped in a four-man canoe, three-man canoe. Four of them paddled out, and all four of them drowned. And it's funny. On my way up, what I thought was to get him, and it ended up being to claim him and identify him. Um, I had thought back of 15 years before. It was my first time I had met a medium. And I think I had done it. I know why now I had done it, but at the time I thought it was just curiosity or spiritual quest or something. And the reading, and Nancy Myers was her name, and this was around 99, 2000. And the reading was rather mundane. There wasn't a lot because there wasn't a whole lot of desperation. It didn't need to connect. It was a typical family where my mom and dad had crossed over. An older brother or two had made the journey, but everybody kind of in order. But at the end of the reading, uh, she said, your dad is here and he's holding a caboose and he's saying railroad. She said, sometimes spirits tell me things that I have no idea, but that's just for you. And if you look over my shoulder, there's a railroad lantern on the top of my dresser.
Mm-hmm.
So my dad was a railroader for 40 years. My grandfather was a railroader. My Uncle Bill was a railroader. All five of us boys worked on the railroad during college, and I was a brakeman on the railroad even after I stayed on after I
Wow.
left school and worked as a railroad. So when I got that message, it was really clear to me, Temple, that my dad was somewhere that I could connect with. Now,
Mm-hmm.
at the time I thought, okay, nifty, and I just kind of put it
Mm-hmm.
away in my file cabinet of my brain. And then 15 years later, I'm driving up to Wisconsin, and the thought came to me, or was put in my head as I believe, that said, if my dad's somewhere, then my son's with him. And I just got to figure that out. And that started me on this search for where do we go? Can we connect? And I got to be honest with you, it's kind of a, hard-nosed blue collar guy. And if I was keeping steps trying to figure this out, yet if I found out it was all new age hokey BS, I would just cross it off the list. I wasn't trying to make it fit.
Mm-hmm.
Yet every step I took reinforced. He'd come back and I brought him. They had to ship the body back from Wisconsin because it was a different state. Um, I had reached out to Nancy, and she told me things about the accident that I wouldn't know until I got the coroner's report. So
Mm-hmm.
it was very validating, and I knew it was real. So that started my journey. My journey was going to mediums, going to spirit circles, going to sessions, going to listen to speakers, anything that I could get my arms around. I read as much as I could Bob Olson's book, which was Answers from the Other Side, which was Lynette Metter About the Other Side. So I kept trying to see if follow this little yellow brick road and see if it went anywhere. And some amazing things happened. About 6 months in Temple, I went and I saw a medium, a local medium, 20, 30 miles away, that had gotten great reviews, worked with a police department. And when he got there, I had actually, and I think your audience will get a little food out of this kind of thinking. When we buried him in January on the North Shore of Chicago, so it was pretty snowy. And when the snow melted, even though we had bought 3 graves, he was buried next to another couple. So I pitched a fit, wrote a check, moved him over one, and I'll occupy that spot. As a matter of fact, right now, waiting for me is the is the uh, I, is the ashes of our Labrador, who I put next to
Mm.
Chris. So instead of Cassidy and I going to visit Chris, now I go visit Cassidy and Chris. And so the ground was loose around there. This was June 30th, 2016, and the ground was loose around the grave. So I planted some shamrock seeds. Now, nobody knew about that. Wasn't hiding it, right? Um, it was just, I ordered them. They came in from Amazon, and that same morning I was going to go to the grave and go out and meet this medium. And I did. I planted the shamrock seeds, and I go to the grave often. And I know that he doesn't live there, Temple, but it's a great place for us to connect spiritually. It's a
Sure.
thin place
Yeah.
for me. I went to see this medium, and he said, Chris is here, right, and your family was together yesterday celebrating something that involved you, and it was my wife's and my wedding anniversary, which of course we didn't celebrate 6 months after, losing our eldest, the most beloved. And so he said, but Chris wants you to know that he acknowledges you were planting something at his grave, and that you're wearing a bracelet he gave you. Now, under my cuff is this bracelet that Christopher gave me when he was 5, when we were at Disney World.
Mm.
And he got this bracelet that said Dad. And after the Disney World trip, I put it in my dresser and didn't touch it again until that morning when I was going to the grave.
Oh, wow.
That moment, Temple, was the moment I went from believing to knowing.
Mhm.
I knew that my Chris was coming through, and I was looking into the eyes of a medium who was looking at my son.
Mm.
And at that point, just kicked it into gear. And I knew that I needed to fill as much of the day with him as I possibly could. So on the first anniversary, so January 3rd, 2017, I had started coming in this office. This is my office, but it used to be his bedroom in my house. And I had come in here and meditate and burn sage, which I just did, and lit a candle, which I do. And I may not look like a guy that burns sage and lights a candle, but that's exactly who I am.
It works for me.
It works for me. And during the meditation, I aligned my chakras, did all the things that I picked up tips on the way. I started getting downloads from Chris, describing heaven, describing the air, describing colors. And I wasn't sure if I was leaving the reservation there in Temple or if it really happened, but I
Mhm.
wrote everything down religiously. And that same experience has been happening at least twice a month for the last 7.5 years. So one reason I knew that it wasn't me, that I wasn't creating something to put a salve on my wounded heart, my broken heart, right, was that Christopher said to me, I love Scotty and he loved me. We were pals. You got to let go of that, Pop. You got to let go of that. And what that was I was mad at the kid whose parents owned the house. I thought it's their fault. They were too lenient. Now the truth of the matter is, it could have been my house. It could have very easily been. I was not exactly the strictest parent when it came to that kind of thing. So, but being Irish, they say, Irish Alzheimer's is you forget everything but the grudges, right? So, I had to be mad at somebody. So I was mad at Scott. He said, Dad, you got to let go of that. And so I said, sure, Chris, for you, anything, I'll let go. And besides, I thought, when will I ever see Scotty again? Right? 12 hours later, and this is at 3 o'clock in the morning, is when I always come in here and do this. 12 hours later at the grave, I get a text from some of his college buddies. They were a fraternity and they're great blue collar kids, reminded me of the kids I grew up with. And they said, Mr. McHugh, a few of us are meeting at the grave. Could you join us? I said, I'd be honored. So I grabbed a cooler with some beer and Gatorade and some cigars, and I pulled in, and there were 40 kids at the grave. And the first kid that I saw was Scotty. So Chris was preparing me so that I could go up and embrace this kid who was just as brokenhearted as I was, and tell him it wasn't his fault and that Chris loved him and that I loved him, and those are the lessons he's been continuously giving me to pass on to parents and specifically parents who've lost kids, but anybody who has a loss. Um, there's a great line from Haruki Murakami that says, once the storm is over, you won't remember how you made it through, how you managed to survive. You won't even be sure whether the storm is really over. But one thing is certain, when you come out of the storm, you won't be the same person who walked in. And that's what storms are all about. And that's what the lesson for me is, because of soul contracts, which, believe me, there were things I knew nothing about soul contracts. I want to renegotiate mine, by the way, but because of soul contracts, Christopher had to leave early and I had to carry on a message from work from him. And wouldn't it be a waste if my son had to, have such a short time here and then leave and me not make something good out of that, So,
Mhm.
I these days I follow the breadcrumbs. I was at a wonderful convention last weekend where they asked me to speak, which I was honored at All Souls weekend. There were 200 people, and 5 of them were guys. Which was great to be able to break
Of
through a little
course,
bit.
yes.
And there were some sacred moments there where it was a father who had lost a son 6 months ago and just couldn't get his arms around it, and a mom who just lost her daughter, and somebody who has lost a child through suicide and wanted to know if he's in heaven, and that's the opportunity that I get to share my story, Chris's story. That Chris tells me that he uses the term bliss when he talks about the other side, and that families on the other side, and soul families, you know. And my journey's continued like that, Temple, since that day.
hmm it's such a beautiful and rich story, and quite frankly, to me, I'm sure other people feel this way, that it's more meaningful because, like you said, I was just a guy living my life, living in the box of my
Yeah,
understanding. It doesn't mean you didn't have an amazing life, but like Joe McHugh,
yeah,
metaphysical,
right.
um, talking to people on the other side, saging the house, lighting candles, lining up his chakras. No, I probably wouldn't pick you out of a crowd. That would
Yeah,
be like you wouldn't be the first person I would call or the second. And to me, that's the profoundness of all of this, is that I think it's more achievable. That's where I want to get to. I
yeah,
think you give a level of hope and promise that channelers, mediums, psychics, they're
yeah.
all, well, not all, but
I
some
agree.
are really within integrity and really are phenomenal. And what would we do without them? But to have someone of stepping up of their own community, their own
A
walk of
very
life.
common guy, right? Just
Yeah,
an
it's
ordinary guy on this amazing mission that I
hmm
didn't choose. And Chris says that to me, Temple. He said, "You're a great ambassador, Pop." And even to this day, he calls me Pop when he's kind of playing, and Dad when it's serious. And he said, "You're a great ambassador, Dad, because you don't look like you carry this message, and that's
hmm
important."
hmm It's really incredible. So you have a website, don't you?
I do. It's joemcquillan.net, and there's a bunch of interviews, a couple of documentaries. Um, 2 things that are very important on there is I have steps to connect, which are my steps that I connect at the 3 a.m. meetings I have with Chris, and then a chakra chart, which is, nothing. It's a chakra chart. I didn't invent it. I didn't, it's something that I put together because I find it very, very valuable. The routine of following these routines that almost that allow you to meditate almost to the point of a trance. And it's funny because people say, "Oh, I can't meditate," and it's like, look at me. I have ADD. I'm an A-type personality. Um, until it was important enough, I couldn't either. But when it was important enough, you know, and people say, "Why?" 3 o'clock in the morning. Well, that's when he wakes me up. That's when I
Mhm.
get shaken awake for our communication. And I initially thought Temple it was because he drowned at like 3:20 to 3:30, but it wasn't. It's because that's when spirits are very active between 3 and 4, the witching
Mhm.
hour. And the reason for that is I have no idea. But
No,
I
I've heard
also,
that. I've heard that
yeah,
many times, though. That's when the portal is more
it's
available.
it's thinner, and
hmm
I completely concur. And also, there's no distractions. I work for a living. I put deals together. So I'm not answering emails at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm not looking up anything at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm not trying to put deals together at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'm doing one thing. I'm focused on connecting with my son.
hmm
Um, and dang if it doesn't happen. And the parents who want to connect, I'm a huge fan of mediums, yeah, like you said, and I've been fortunate enough to encounter, some very good ones, and
hmm
uh, and all of them legit. I think it's very difficult to exist in this age now and be a fraud. because it's
Hmm.
too easy to check and do, look up, people. And like I saw this Andrew Anderson on Bob Olson's website. I didn't even realize it was his. And he worked for the police department. And Sherry Jewell, who I just came back from, she was at the same seminar and did an amazing group of readings. And so I've got to connect with these people, and they've become actually friends now, right? I mean, they'll go to events with me. Sherry Jewell, Sally, and I went and saw John Edward crossing over, and of course, Chris came screaming through at the end.
Of course,
I'll
yes.
tell you a funny story about Sherry. I was at my sister's house. Now, my sister Marcia, and I'm looking at her mass card, and she crossed February of 2019, and she was Christopher's godmother. And I'm 39 years sober. I was crazy as a hoot owl growing up, and so she loved me even when I wasn't lovable, and a very important part of my life. And so I rented her house for a month in February, and I was in her house, and I was talking to my friend Sherry. I just hadn't talked to her in a while, and so I dialed her up, and she said, "Well, let's see if Chris will come through." And she said, "Chris, I can't reach Chris, but there's this other woman. Are you in Marcia's house? Are you in Florida?" I go, "Yeah, I am." And she said, "Marcia wants to know where the keys are." And we had just come back from Siesta Key, and I had put the keys under the mat for the guy who looks after the house, and the keys were gone. And she said, "Marcia said to tell you, don't get locked out." So I went over to the wall. There's a hook on the wall with the master keys in it, and I put them in my pocket. And I sat back down, and Sherry said, "Marcia said, put the keys back on the hook." Now, we weren't on Zoom, Temple.
Right,
We were on a
right.
phone call, right? And you just have to laugh at
Hmm.
the evidence that these beloved spirits, when they want to connect, will give you hard, fast evidence that they're there, and that they can connect with you,
And
so
I'm really with you, and had so many experiences in my own life and continue to. And I, with others on the other side of all ages and of all areas of closeness, grandparents or my mom, or a grandmother, or whatever. And so it seems to me, I feel that you said a very strong statement for people listening, going, "Well, I think so, but I'm not really sure." I love the statement that you made, that I went from believing to knowing. And that takes courage to make that radical shift in yourself, when most people, not all of us got to start out like Yogananda.
yeah.
I go to my parents and I go, "Oh, I think I'm this mystical person." And they go, "Oh, well, let's get you all kind of people to talk to." For the most part, we only knew what we saw, in our experience and our culture and what we were introduced to. So to be asked at a certain level of life in the midst of such loss, let's just turn you topsy-turvy and open up your gate of the heart and the pathway for you to talk to someone on the other side, and actually tell people about it. Not just tell people about it, but put out a couple of successful books about it. I mean, that takes chutzpah.
Well,
It
yes
it
and no. And I would love to
Mhm.
take credit, but I will tell you, I came from a wonderfully dysfunctional Irish Catholic family. Just a lot of love, too much
Mhm.
alcohol, a lot of craziness. And when my sister was being buried, her friend was a wonderful therapist who said the McQuillans put fun back in dysfunction, or and that was so true. But
Mhm.
I did grow up, that we were this big Irish Catholic family, moved to the suburbs with a lot of kids, and saw, football games in the street and parties that were too loud, and the neighbors hated us. So we learned to rely on each other. It was our
Mhm.
tribe, right?
Yeah.
And I was telling Andrea this wonderful quote that I keep on my wall for a woman that I met right after the first book. And she said, "You had the unassailable self-confidence that comes from a childhood insulated with love."
Mm.
And
Mhm.
that's what it was, is
Powerful.
that
Yeah.
I knew I was loved. And
Mhm.
so does everybody in my family of origin buy in? No.
Hmm.
Does some think I probably left the reservation? Maybe. But the
Hmm.
truth of the matter is, I don't care.
Right.
I really don't. I know that I live my life two ways now, Temple, and it's not always how I live my life. It's not like I was a pirate or anything, but I was selfish. I lived my life to please my God and to make my son proud.
Hmm.
So if that doesn't involve somebody else buying in, and by the way, if somebody's not interested, one of the first interviews I did was this radio station in Texas. And the woman said, "What do you tell people that just don't buy it?" I said, "Tell them to change the channel. Listen to sports
Right.
radio, right?
That's right. That's
I'm not
right.
trying to convince you anything. What I'm trying to do is if there is a parent or somebody who has lost somebody that's heart's broken and just don't know if they're there or gone. I want them to read the first book. I want them
Hmm.
to watch a show like this one, to know that they're still here. Now it's a bad deal, Temple. I would rather be abysmally ignorant of all things metaphysical and go golfing with my kid tomorrow and have a pizza,
Sure, of
right?
course.
But that's a bell
Absolutely.
that can't be unrung.
Yeah.
So what am I going to do? So I know that if I care, I got this great, amazing ability to connect with my son, right? It's God given, this amazing
Hmm.
ability, and it's him. And for your viewers who don't are new at this, they're at a higher energy level than we are. We're down here, so
Yes.
we has to raise our level through meditation, and they have to lower their level to connect with us. And it's not an easy task, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
they're working at being connected, but you got to do your job. But if you can do that, then you too can connect with somebody you love. So I'm given this amazing gift of connecting with my son, but I got to give it away to keep it, right?
Yeah.
If I hoard it like Midas is, uh, gold, then I'm not sure I'm going to be given that gift anymore. I'm supposed to be a messenger, not a hoarder.
Well, I've been knowing you for a few years now. And I met you even sooner than around
Yeah,
COVID, or because I've not even been here 3 years. I met you like 5 years ago
yeah, yeah,
because you were on the show. It was called Intentional Spirit.
right,
And you were on the show not only once, but twice. And you you have such a gentle way of sharing who you are and your story. And you're so, I mean, I feel we all need a level of ego, esteem, knowing we are
yeah,
God's beloved and, all of that. And yet, the gentle way in which you live from a place of non-attachment is so it's very memorable for
well,
me
thank
because
you.
I not that I'm the spokesperson of the universe, but I have been doing this a time or two, and I just I really resonate so much with your spirit and your dedication, and I'm so glad that Chris and you agreed to visit with me
Right.
again. And at some point, I'm going to find myself somewhere and we're going to have you come in and be a guest speaker. I
I would
just
love
feel
that.
it. I
I
just
would, I
feel
do
it. I
too. I
regretted
do
that
too.
we missed that
Me too. It wasn't the
before.
same without you. I'm going to tell you that.
Well, it was because we have a kindred connection,
I
and
know.
I'm thankful to Chris for that. And I thank you for what you continue to do and your dedication. And let's say the website again
It's
is
joemcquillan.net, and
joemcquillan.net, and I
my
will put that
email
in the
is
notes.
jbmcquillan@gmail.com. If you have a question, if you want to touch base, if there's a story you want to share, I return every 100% of the emails, and I connect with people because that's what Chris wants me to do, Temple.
Well, I thank you so much for who you are in this world. And I thank you so much for being on our podcast today.
Thanks for letting me share the message.
Oh my gosh, our pleasure.